On the evening of May the 11th, 2023, a 20-year-old woman did not answer her door. Early that day, she had confirmed plans to meet friends at her apartment pool in Midland, Texas, at approximately 6 p.m. One of those friends arrived and began knocking. There was no response. When she pressed lightly against the door, she could see a thin crack of light from inside the apartment. Assuming her friend might just be asleep or in the shower, she left briefly to get food. At around 8 p.m., she then returned with another friend. This time, the light that had been visible earlier was no longer on. Repeated phone calls now went unanswered. Concern growing, they contacted the woman's brother. Before 11 p.m., the apartment manager unlocked the door so that the friends could check on her. Inside, her phone was found between the couch cushions. Also in the apartment was her purse and her car keys. Her vehicle was still parked outside in the lot. Her dog had been left alone without food or water. Very strangely, a black coffee table that normally sat in the living room was now missing. And, near the entryway, a mop and bucket of dirty water were sitting on the floor. The floor itself felt unusually sticky underfoot, but even with these clues, there were no obvious signs explaining where the woman had gone. There was no clear indication that she had packed or planned to leave. If her phone, keys and car were all still there, then how or why would she have left the apartment? And if she did not leave voluntarily, then who else could have had access to that locked door? In this video, I will share with you 7 documented facts that make this case truly disturbing. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if all of that sounds like your kind of thing, then make sure you join the Dark Case family now, by simply hitting subscribe and turning all notifications on. Now, I don't like asking for help. However, you may have realised that over the last couple of years, views on this channel have really kind of gone downhill. I'm not sure what to do to get them back up. I just want to keep sharing these stories and shedding light onto victims that have been otherwise forgotten. You just being here watching is helping me do that, and if you really want to support me, then please do consider joining as a channel member. There are now 3 tiers of memberships, and some of the perks include things like early access to videos, access to exclusive videos, and access to the Jack's House podcast, which is like a personal behind the scenes thing that I record in my car in the cemetery. All of your help and support really does allow me to keep on doing what I'm doing. And now for today's silly little question. Would you rather take $2 million now or make $5,000 per week for life? Let me know down in the comments. But now, on with the video. The woman who lived in that apartment was 20-year-old Madeline Molina Pantoja. She lived at Palladium Museum Place apartments at 1711 West Francis Avenue in Midland, Texas. Madeline worked as a bartender at a local restaurant. She was described as 5 foot 4 inches tall and approximately 130 pounds with brown hair. She had a butterfly tattoo behind her ear and a snake with a rose tattoo on her arm. On May the 9th, 2023 at approximately 11 p.m, a friend dropped Madeline off at her apartment. This was the last confirmed time that she was seen alive by someone in person. The following evening on May the 10th, events can be narrowed down into a small window. At 8:35 p.m, Madeline's brother spoke with her on the phone. He later told investigators that his sister sounded upset. The reason for her distress was apparently an argument that she had had earlier that evening. At 8:37 p.m, her brother sent a follow-up text message, but Madeline did not respond. However, at 9:31 p.m, she did send a text message to a friend, confirming their plans to meet at her apartment pool the next day. That message would become the final outgoing communication from Madeline's phone. After that point, there were no additional confirmed responses from her. From an investigative standpoint, this timestamp really matters. When detectives analyse disappearances, they work outwards from the final verified communication. So that 9:31 p.m. message, it establishes that Madeline was alive, and she was actively making plans at that time for the next day. It also establishes that whatever occurred afterwards happened within a now narrowing window, the window between the final message and when her friend showed up the next day. Madeline's daily routine, according to friends, included frequent communication and checking in regularly with everyone. So when someone who routinely responds within minutes, then suddenly stops communicating entirely, investigators treat that shift in behaviour as significant. The next confirmed activity tied to the case would not come from Madeline's phone. It would come from the early morning hours of May the 11th. Before sunrise, something occurred in or around that apartment complex that would later become central to the investigation. Yet at that point, nobody understood that they were already inside that critical window. In missing person investigations, the hours immediately following the final confirmed communications are often the most important. That confirmed point was 9:31 p.m. on May the 10th. However, investigators would later focus heavily on the period between midnight and dawn. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on May the 11th, a neighbour who lived beneath Madeline's apartment reported waking up to loud yelling. She described hearing both a male and female voice. She also reported hearing a woman scream. The neighbour stated that arguments were not uncommon in that apartment, and that she had just learned to usually tune them out. However, she specifically described the scream on that night as sounding like one made out of fear rather than anger. When officers document statements like this, they log them as another potential time anchor. Even if the witness cannot identify individuals, the timestamp may help narrow down investigative focus. Around that same early morning period, a digital footprint also began to grow. At 12:26 a.m., traffic and surveillance cameras began capturing a pickup truck that was travelling in the direction of Madeline's apartment complex. At 1:59 a.m., a security camera near an oil company off Montgomery Street recorded a pickup truck in the area. The vehicle visible in that footage had two different coloured rims on the passenger side. Distinct vehicle features like mismatched rims are important because they reduce ambiguity when reviewing low-resolution footage. It makes a truck stand out and easier to spot. At 3:22 a.m., a flock license plate reader camera captured the vehicle's license plate near South County Road 1160. Flock systems automatically log plate numbers, timestamps, and geolocation data, allowing investigators to reconstruct travel routes after the fact. Additional camera data showed that between approximately 12:26 a.m. and 3:37 a.m., that vehicle travelled from a residential apartment complex and then later returned to that same residence. This matters for two reasons. Firstly, it places a specific vehicle in proximity to the apartment during the same window in which neighbours reported yelling and screaming. And secondly, it can contradict any claim that that vehicle remained stationary overnight. At this stage of the investigation, officers were not working with anything solid. They were just organising timestamps. They had the final outgoing message at 9:31. They had a reported scream at approximately 1:30 a.m. They had a truck captured on cameras between 12:26 a.m. and 3:37 a.m. The question investigators now faced was pretty simple. Who was driving that vehicle during those early morning hours? And how did those movements connect to what was later found inside the apartment? At this point, the identity of the vehicle's owner had not yet been publicly revealed, but internally, detectives were already beginning to line up the timeline against other statements that they had been given. Even if digital data conflicts with a verbal account, it doesn't mean that any of that evidence should be discounted. Instead, it means it should be tested, and that testing process by investigators would soon expand far beyond cameras and deep into phone records. At 11:02 p.m. on May the 11th, officers with the Midland Police Department were dispatched in order to conduct a welfare check at Madeline's apartment. By the time officers arrived at 11:13 p.m, family members had already expressed concern that Madeline's personal belongings were still inside the unit. When patrol officers respond to a welfare check involving an adult, The initial purpose is simple. They just want to confirm whether the individual is present and safe, or otherwise. However, when officers investigate conditions that suggest possible criminal activity, the situation swings immediately from welfare verification onto evidence preservation. Inside the apartment, officers observed a mop and bucket of dirty water positioned near the entryway. They also noted that the flooring felt unusually sticky underfoot. This was consistent with a heavy cleaning solution having been recently used. I mean, kind of ironically, excess cleaning product can leave residue when an area is scrubbed aggressively, but not rinsed afterwards. In cases involving potential violence, signs of recent cleaning are documented carefully, because they may indicate an attempt to alter or remove evidence. At the point of these findings, a detective was notified. Madeline's case then transitioned from a routine welfare check into a suspicious disappearance investigation. The following morning at approximately 10:50 a.m. on May the 12th, officers received another call, reporting a woman's voice that had been heard inside the apartment, and given the prior concerns, officers made entry again to verify whether Madeline was present. During the second entry, additional details were observed. There was a hole in the bathroom door. There was also a hole in the bedroom door. And there was also hair found attached to the damaged area. Hair being attached to impact damage is significant because it suggests contact that occurred during a forceful movement or impact. Officers also noted that the comforter from the bed was missing, and a dark red stain was visible on the bedsheet. When officers encounter staining consistent with possible red DNA, they must document, photograph, and collect that sample. Each item must be logged, bagged, and preserved to maintain the chain of custody. The presence of the damage to the doors, and the possible red DNA staining, along with the signs of cleaning, all of this collectively changes the classification of the case. Detectives formally determined that foul play had occurred inside Madeline's apartment. This kind of determination is not made lightly. It requires actual evidence to suggest that an act dangerous to human life may have taken place. The race was now on to hopefully find Madeline alive and well. Discovering who had access to a location becomes extremely important when there are no signs of forced entry into a home, and in this case, the apartment had been locked. There was no indication of forced entry. That narrowed the field significantly. Detectives now had 3 parallel tracks. They had a specific overnight window tied to a reported scream. They had the vehicle moving during that same time frame, and they had physical indicators from inside the home, suggesting an attack, followed by a cleanup. When those 3 tracks intersect, investigators begin focusing on consistencies between them. So in this case, who had access to the apartment, who was in the area during that critical window, and who lined up to digital records. At this stage, publicly, very little information was being shared. But sadly, internally, the investigation was no longer about a missing person. It had become a homicide investigation. Detectives would now move on to cell data, because tracking vehicles relies on cameras. But what happens when there are no cameras on that vehicle? Phones, however, they track and map a lot more. Data from the right phone can narrow a search zone from miles to meters. Once detectives determined that foul play had likely occurred inside the apartment, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate scene. The next important thing was to determine where Madeline had been taken. On May the 13th, investigators obtained a warrant for cell phone records associated with a specific AT&T number. When law enforcement seeks phone records in a violent crime investigation, they request call logs, tower connections, and geolocation data where available. Unlike just GPS tracking, cell phone geolocation works by measuring which towers a device connects to, and then estimates proximity based on signal strength and times. Those records, though, are not always immediate. Investigators must wait for the provider to produce responsive data.
These efforts include the enlistment of assistance from members of the Midland County Sheriff's Office, Texas Rangers, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Department of Homeland Security investigations. The search of approximately 60 square miles of remote property using human assets, drones, and manned aircraft. the execution of over 12 search warrants related to both tangible property and technological data, interview of approximately 25 individuals thus far, follow-up investigation of approximately 20 tips derived from Crime Stoppers, as well as call-ins to the Midland Police Department. Although we have identified no threat of danger to the general public at this time, as already mentioned by the mayor, and the investigation continues to be classified as a missing person search, please be assured that should evidence suggest foul play, criminal enforcement actions will be taken without delay.
While they were waiting for that data, search teams were deployed across Midland County. Law enforcement later confirmed that approximately 60 square miles of remote property were searched. Ground teams, drones, and manned aircraft were used. More than a dozen search warrants were executed during that period. Over 25 individuals were interviewed. More than 20 tips were followed up. Large-scale rural searches like this require intense planning. Teams divide the land into segments and then systematically clear each one of those segments to avoid wasting time or missing a single square inch of land. But even with coordinated efforts, 60 square miles represents a vast amount of terrain.
Madeline Pantoja has been missing for a week now. Her keys, phone, purse, and dog were all left in her apartment, and the search for her continues. Another prayer service was held for her tonight. Tyler Dupnick with us now on the latest, and Tyler, loved ones really banding together and trying to get their hopes up to find out where she is.
Yeah, that's right, Alex. A very emotional night. It's for the third straight night they came together to pray for Madeline. Now, they recited the rosary this evening at Our Lady of Guadalupe Shrine and Parish in Midland, and the plan is to continue to pray for Madeline until she is found. As the rosary was recited Wednesday evening by loved ones of Madeline Pantoja, a powerful call to God is made in the hope of finding her.
We're just very desperate. We're just begging God to help us get her back home. We're just doing whatever we can to just get the most help we can from anywhere.
At this point, we need God. We need him to guide us through this, to guide the police through this. We need help because it's been 6 days, 7 days. Like, we can't keep waiting.
Ramos and Hernandez say hope is the only thing left to hold on to. The last week has felt constant for them as they try and find their best friend.
The days have just been
all mushed together, honestly.
Because we've just been doing the same thing. We've just been reaching out to whoever we can reach out to, looking in the lands, fields, and everywhere we can look for her.
It's like the best word right now is just heartbroken because we feel hopeless. There's nothing that we can do. Like, it's out of our hands, and we searched everywhere.
We passed out flyers everywhere.
With prayers set to continue, their efforts will remain as well.
If you're watching this, Maddie, just be strong. We're coming to get you, and we're trying our hardest to find you. Just stay strong, and we will stay strong too.
We just hope that you're safe and you're alive, and that at the end of this, you're at the end of this. You're the light at the end of the tunnel after all of this, and we won't stop searching.
Ever.
Then, in the early morning hours of May the 20th, the requested cell records were received. Investigators then sent those records to a Texas Ranger for geolocation mapping. The mapped data focused on the period between May the 10th and May the 12th. Upon reviewing the plotted coordinates, detectives identified an approximate 1-mile area of interest near East County Road 190 and South County Road 1138. This was now their priority search area. There was no guarantee of a result, but it's a good place to start. Resources were redirected accordingly, and a search was conducted within that 1-mile radius. During that search, remains were discovered. Detectives on scene compared jewelry found with the remains to items that Madeline was known to wear. Based on that comparison, investigators identified the remains as Madeline Molina Pantoja. She was then transported to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office, and an autopsy and formal identification was carried out. At that moment, the The investigation shifted from locating a missing person to now having a confirmed homicide victim. A source close to the investigation later stated that Madeline's remains were found inside that black coffee table, the one that was missing from her apartment.
Loved ones placed flowers near a memorial for her, and the ceremony concluded with a balloon release. Baby pink was a color Madeline loved, and that was one of many ways she was represented last night.
I think it was just a way of showing her, showing how much she touched everybody's hearts. It was a way to celebrate her even though she's no longer here with us. It was a way to show us how much we love her and will continue loving her throughout eternal life.
Benavidez said that Madeline deserved a gathering like this and spoke on the kind of person she was.
It was always her smile, her endless laughs. She could be serious for 5 minutes and she would just end up making everybody laugh. She was just a sweet soul. She was so loving. She would take 5 minutes out of her day to be there for absolutely anybody that needed it. And I know that she still would have continued to do that if she were still here with us.
Now, Benavidez told me that they were grateful for the support that came out last night during what was an emotional evening. She also mentioned in our conversation that they were grateful for the time that they spent with Madeline. Her burial service will take place this morning at 11, and a memorial mass will be held tomorrow morning at 9.
Now investigators could return to the timeline with a new clarity. They had the apartment where foul play was determined. They had a vehicle moving during that overnight window. They had cell data placing a device within a remote 1-mile search zone where remains were ultimately located. They had also established that Madeline's apartment had been locked with no signs of forced entry. Access now became the central question. So, who had a key to that apartment? Who was it that was present during the argument on May the 10th? Who owned that vehicle with the mismatched rims? The vehicle that was captured during the early morning hours? And whose cell phone data was it that mapped directly to the field where Madeline was found? That convergence led investigators to one man. Investigators identified the man as 24-year-old Mario Juan Chacon Jr. Mario had been in a relationship with Madeline prior to her disappearance. According to family and friends though, the couple had recently broken up. Mario had previously lived at the same apartment complex, and he did still have access to Madeline's unit from their time together. In fact, multiple witnesses confirmed that he did possess a key to her apartment. On May the 10th, the evening before Madeline was reported missing, Mario contacted her brother. During that call, he stated that he and Madeline had argued and that she was now not answering his calls. Later that night, when friends and family were unable to reach Madeline, Mario told them that he had been at his own home all day. He stated that family members could verify his location. At 9:26 p.m. on May the 11th, he even sent his location to Madeline's brother, showing that he was at home. Mario also owned a 2012 Ford F-250 pickup truck. Surveillance footage from the early morning hours of May the 11th showed that pickup truck with 2 different coloured rims, and it was near Madeline's apartment. Investigators later determined that that vehicle did belong to Mario. Traffic cameras, business surveillance systems, and a flock license plate reader placed that truck travelling between his home and Madeline's apartment complex during that window. When interviewed by law enforcement in the early morning hours of May the 12th, Mario stated that the last time he physically saw Madeline was May the 9th. He also stated that his last communications with her was around 9 p.m. on May the 10th. During a later interview on May the 12th, he said that he had gone to the apartment complex, but that was in order to drop off a cousin who also lived there. On May the 12th, after detectives informed him of inconsistencies in his timeline, Mario then ended the interview and he declined a polygraph test. By the time the cell phone data was mapped to the field where Madeline was found, investigators had already aligned vehicle movement, phone data, and the person that had access to Madeline's apartment to just one person, and that person was indeed Mario. At approximately 3:30 p.m. on May the 20th, the same day that the remains were discovered, Mario was taken into custody and he was charged with murder. The investigative phase had now transitioned into the legal phase. and what would follow would involve indictments, motions, and their own drama. When Mario Juan Chacon Jr. was arrested on May 20, 2023, the charge filed was murder under Texas Penal Code 1902. That statute covers intentional or knowing acts that cause the ending of another individual, as well as acts clearly dangerous to human life that do result in an ending. His bond was set at $3 million. A high bond amount typically reflects the seriousness of the charge, as well as the perceived risk factors considered by the court. On July 19, 2023, a Midland County grand jury returned an indictment, charging Mario with one count of murder. An indictment, though, does not determine guilt. It just says that there's probable cause, and it then moves to trial. The indictment said that Mario did this on purpose, and that he used multiple forms of physical assault. These included striking and pressure to the neck. The language included in the indictment references to both hands and unknown instruments being used. Mario's defense now filed several motions. A motion to quash the indictment argued that the charging language was too broad. The court, however, denied that motion.
Yeah, Jay and Mary Kate, family, friends, and concerned citizens all made their way to the Midland County Courthouse earlier today to voice their concerns over Madeline Pantoja and Mario Chacon Jr. Over the last month, West Texans have been coming out and expressing their emotions and have been the voice for Madeline. We are Madeline! And today was no different. Over 100 people were here today to make it clear that they oppose any bond reduction for Mario Chacon, whose bond was set for $3 million after being arrested for the murder of Madeline. During the hearing today, the prosecution called Chacon's mother to the stand, where they talked about the background of her son and their family ties to Mexico, where both the mother and father of Mario Chacon Jr. are originally from. The defense asked for the bond to be lowered to $750,000 and to let Chacon's bond out through the Midland County pretrial program.
Would also require that other conditions be imposed on the case. You'd have to report once or twice a month, maybe even weekly, have a curfew, even a GPS monitor. But we were most agreeable with those conditions in this case.
The prosecution then asked the mother of Mario Chacon questions, including whether or not she would co-sign for the bond and what type of assets the family has. She responded that they have the house, the cars, and an 18-wheeler. Despite the mother of Chacon testifying that they have assets, the family of Madeline Pantoja continued to voice their disapproval of any bond reduction.
Pray and hope that the judge touches his heart and sees our pain, that he sees everything he put our family through, and he doesn't give them that reduction.
The defense also sought a reduction in bond. That request was also denied. A motion for change of venue was filed, asserting that the pretrial publicity and public demonstrations could prevent a fair trial in Midland County. That motion was also denied. Multiple trial dates were scheduled over the following 2 years. Some were rescheduled or delayed, but throughout that period, Mario remained in custody. Eventually, though, rather than proceeding to a jury trial, Mario finally entered a guilty plea. He pleaded guilty to murder. He also pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence. The court then sentenced him to 35 years for murder and 20 years for tampering with evidence. The sentences were ordered to run concurrently, meaning they will be served at the same time, rather than consecutively, one after the other. I really hate this, by the way. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. Mario also received credit for time served beginning from his 2023 arrest. Under Texas law, he must now serve half of the 35-year sentence, before then becoming eligible for parole consideration. Parole eligibility, though, it doesn't guarantee that he will be released at that time. All it means is that the case can be reviewed. For Madeline's family, legally, it meant that this was over. For investigators, to all intents and purposes, it meant that they had won. At the time that she met her end, Madeline was 20 years old. She left behind a family, friends, and a community that spent 10 days searching fields and roads before their nightmare then became their reality. Let me know your thoughts on this case down in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed, please do hit subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, then please do consider becoming a channel member for exclusive perks, like members only videos, or the behind the scenes podcast. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.